Assalamu alaikum, Amina.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for joining us on the Progeny Podcast on our third season. I want to start by asking you about mental health. Why did you choose to go down this path in your career?
That's a really good question. So, of course, I'm a doctor and my early career started in pediatrics, so very much a focus on physical health, I guess. But then I realized that I was always much more interested in the emotions and in the processes and in the systems behind illness rather than just the physical illness itself. So I remember when I was actually pregnant with my first child, and I was, quite advanced pregnancy in pediatrics, and we had a really unfortunate case come in of a young child who had actually drowned in the bathtub. And, resuscitation and all of the medical processes that need to take place were very much focused on. And then I found myself just thinking about that family for days afterwards, for weeks afterwards, for years afterwards.
Wow.
And really thinking about, where they must be at right now, how they must be doing. And I think it just made me realize that I'm so much more interested in the stories and in the, the humans behind the illness. That's probably where my interest in mental health started. And then, of course, alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity to start working in Iraq. And over there, we have so many fantastic doctors in Iraq. And so physical health care is somewhat catered for. But the mental health care was really lacking. And that's why I chose to spend a bit more time there.
There's a real stigma around mental health. You mentioned Iraq. In our communities, there's, we need to change that because it's not spoken about a lot within our communities. And then hopefully we'll get to child mental health as well, inshallah. But how do we break that sort of stigma that exists, or have you tried to break that? I'm sure you have tried to break that stigma that exists with regards to mental health in Iraq, because we generally concentrate on physical health. No one sort of speaks about mental health, especially in the previous generations. If there's something, you'd be called crazy. This Sudan, where we come from, they'd use the words mkhabbal. Has that sort of, when you first went into Iraq, did you see the stigma, and how did you try and break that?
Yeah, so stigma is a really big thing when it comes to mental health, not just in Iraq. I mean, even if you look at, the UK, if you look at, other very highly developed countries, mental health still is incredibly stigmatized. I'd say it's only been in the last maybe 2, 3 or 4 years when there's been so much more royal attention for the topics of mental health and, patronage of particular mental health charities, that it's really become on people's agenda and people have been speaking about it more. So if that's in the UK, then I think it's, no surprise to hear that mental health is also incredibly stigmatized in Iraq. There are many cases of families where, in the organization we work with, people are suffering. They've been diagnosed with particular mental health conditions and there is help and therapy that is needed and available for them, but they won't attend, or they'll attend one session and drop out, or they, their families won't allow them to attend. And it's, as you said, because of that stigma. And there are lots of ways to break it down. So one of the things that we've done, for example, is role modeling. So, you've done it so well on your podcast in previous episodes where you've had people speak about their own mental health struggles.
Their own experience, yeah.
And we've had lots of recent, high profile examples of that in our community. And that slowly starts to break down the stigma. In the same way that there's no shame in being diabetic or having high blood pressure, then what's the shame in having anxiety or depression or any other mental health condition? So we've done that in Iraq. I was really surprised recently to have been in a meeting with quite a senior manager in the organization, and I was talking to him about mental health, and he said, "Can I sign up? I want to be the first patient in the clinics." And so, people talking about their own struggles is a really great way to slightly destigmatize it. And then the other thing is to really incorporate it as part of holistic care. Mental health hospitals no longer are these asylums, these scary buildings and isolated places. Mental health needs to be in the community, in places that are really accessible, in places that people don't feel embarrassed to go to, so that they, are able to access the care when needed. And so those are two of the ways that I think slowly we'll tackle stigma.
You mentioned your work in the organization. I'm guessing you're talking about Al-Ayn.
Yes.
How did you get to start working with Al-Ayn? How long have you been working there now?
That's such a good question. So it's exactly 9 years.
Okay.
And the reason I know that very accurately is because my husband started working in Al-Ayn before I did.
Okay.
And as you know, there are organizations that when you work with them, they become part of your blood. They become part of your family.
Story of my life.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm smiling. And they take up increasing amounts of your time and
all
effort.
Your time.
Yeah. So that's how my husband started in Al-Ayn first. I wasn't involved, and I was starting to become slightly annoyed at the amount of time that it was taking from his life. And then he said, why don't you join? Like, why don't you become a part of it? Like, rather than fight against it, come and join it, and then it could be our shared thing to do. And that's, funnily enough, how I first started with Al-Ayn, on some simple campaigns to collect toys and distribute them to children in Iraq. And alhamdulillah, slowly, my love and passion for it grew, my skill set evolved, and I took on larger roles within the charity. But it was 9 years, and I remember that well because it started when I was on maternity leave with my son.
Okay, everything, mashallah, is related with your children as well, because the first story you mentioned with you were pregnant with you, and then now it's with your son. So it's nice. In the olden days, if you ask someone like, this is like a side thing, when was this person born, they'd say when I done this. So they'd relate it to. So subhanallah, you've put your children as they're
God bless them, an anchor in my life.
And you worked on different projects. Can you maybe tell us about the projects that you worked in, like the Hikayati, the Stars projects, a bit more about those projects maybe?
Yeah, no, I'd love to tell you about them because, as I said, it's such a big part of my life.
It's part of you now.
Hikayati is a centre in Najaf. It's this amazing purpose-built centre in Najaf where orphan children go and undertake courses and workshops in personal development, resilience building, confidence building, communication skills, anti-bullying, friendships, leadership skills. So all the soft skills that are really, really important for life. I know that academia and academics only takes you so much so far. And all of these soft skills are so incredibly important. So that's one of the things that Hikayati does, is it provides those skills to the children. And then it also provides really intensive mentoring. So all the children are allocated a mentor who they spend the initial 6-week course with, but then they're also mentored on a monthly basis going forward. And that mentorship is really powerful because we're talking about children who've lost their fathers. They're all orphan children. And as we all know, the role of a mother or father, yes, it's to clothe you and feed you and provide you with a house, but that's the basics. Like where they really bring their value, like where a parent makes a difference is in that support you provide your children, the motivation, the advice, the fact that there's always someone who really cares about you. And that's what we want to do with our mentors. So that's Hikayati. It's been in the planning since 2018.
Wow.
It opened its doors to the children in December 2021.
Okay.
So we've been going for about 6 months and it's been amazing. So we've had about 100 children now complete our program and
100 orphans, obviously.
Yeah, all orphan children complete our program. And we've had some really beautiful results. Children who have returned to school after having dropped out of school. Children where, we've discovered difficult physical or mental health conditions where we've been able to help them and put in, packages of support. And just lots and lots of children who've, felt like a child again for the first time in a long time. So that's Hikayati, and that's my third child.
Okay, mashallah.
And
And your fourth child?
And my fourth child is the Anjum al-Zahira, so the Luminous Stars Centre.
Yeah.
This is Al-Ayn's mental health clinic. So the one that's currently up and running is in Kadmiya. It's been up and running for many years, and they see a whole host of mental health conditions. So anxiety, OCD, depression, even, self-harming, suicidality, the whole range of mental health conditions. And they have a small team of therapists, and then they also have a small team of psychiatrists. And they're able to provide really good levels of care for their patients. So that's been running for the last few years, and we now want to expand into 12 other locations in Iraq.
Okay.
So that's my role, trying to work out the training, the development, the protocol, formulation for all of these centers.
Is there a time scale for when these 12 will hopefully open their doors?
Yeah, so in Ramadan just gone, the fundraising for the centers was completed. And they are all at different stages of building. So some of them, like the land has been bought. Some of them are the skeleton of the building's been completed. Some of them are very close to completion. So I would say, they're all at different stages of their production. However, they're all going to be opened, inshallah, in the next few years.
Inshallah. From the outside, again, this is because I'm not involved maybe within Al-Ayn itself directly. And maybe even with other projects in Iraq, everything seems very slow. To the people that don't know how it works in Iraq, they'll say, this is too slow. Things are, they're not progressing and not just with Al-Ayn, with a lot of projects that take place in Iraq. People have this criticism that they are very slow. Someone who's involved with the work of Al-Ayn, what would you say that, to someone that says everything's so slow?
I'd say that's not been my experience of it.
Okay.
I mean, of course, large-scale projects are always going to take time, aren't they? Like the planning, the funding, the building, and you want everything to be correct. You want everything to be up to standard. And so naturally it's going to take time. And I always think, again, even with even in the UK, do you remember when the Millennium Dome was being built, how longer and how much more budget it required? Or now with the high-speed rail between Birmingham and London, all these large projects take time, and it's natural. And I think, so many of my friends and also older family friends have tried to work in Iraq and have gone full of passion and energy and have come back really deflated
yeah 100%.
A few weeks or months later. And I always say that it's so important to go with that spirit of optimism, but also that spirit of humility. I'd say that's why I've really enjoyed working there and why I've managed to continue working there for a few years, is because I go wanting to learn, wanting to really benefit from the local expertise, not criticizing or comparing all the time, and also just, really trying to do things in partnership rather than going as this external expert, because that just gets people's backs up, doesn't it? And so, I think the more positive and optimistic we can be about Iraq, the better the results will be. Like, let's not forget, it's a country that's emerging after 35 years of trauma.
Yeah.
Like, the trauma is ongoing. Like, I am impressed that this stuff is even happening, let alone concerned that it may be slightly slower than schedule.
I'm sure there's a lot of challenges when coming to working in Iraq specifically. Maybe Al-Ayn here in the UK, there's less challenges because maybe there's not much of a culture difference when you work here. But when you go to Iraq, there's the difference of culture. There's the male-dominated environment that I'm sure you've seen in Iraq. Having to speak Arabic, even for someone whose parents are originally Arabs, but because maybe even someone like me, because I'm used to speaking English, when you go, sometimes there's a word that you want to, and you can't express yourself because that word's not coming to you. For someone like you, having to wear an abaya, all these things, how do you overcome these challenges? And do you see them as challenges? Do you even think about these things? Or
Yeah, no, they are challenges, aren't they? And you're right. You've really comprehensively, listed out lots of the challenges of working in Iraq. The language barrier definitely is a big one. I'm so grateful. When we were children, my parents had this rule that every time you spoke English at home, you had to pay a fine. And
I've tried that. It doesn't work.
It was so annoying. But right now, I am so grateful to them for having, put their foot down and insisted on the Arabic language. Because even though my Arabic is not where I would want it to be, alhamdulillah, it's at a level where I can communicate and can, work professionally. And it was really hard in the beginning, but slowly it improved. So the Arabic is a barrier, but one that's been easily overcome, inshallah. In terms of the culture difference, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think that whenever I'm in the UK, I feel very, very Iraqi. But then when I go to Iraq, I suddenly feel really, really British. And so there's definitely a bit of a culture, difference there. And in the beginning, that used to really pain me. It used to really upset me. I used to feel so lost. I'd feel like I don't belong anywhere. My mum's Lebanese, my dad's Iraqi, my husband's Bahraini. I live in the UK, I work in Iraq. It all felt really, really confusing until I suddenly had this realization one day that I don't need to belong to one place. And it's okay to be a mix, and it's okay to be messy. And in fact, my job is to be a bridge, it's to be a bridge between places rather than belonging to one place completely. And so when I'm in the UK, I feel like I'm able to explain and contextualize a lot of things about the Middle East or Iraq to others. And similarly, when I'm in Iraq, I feel like I'm able to get lots of the good practice and, gold standards and share it over there. So I feel like I'm a bridge rather than having to be one thing, and I'm at peace with that now.
Because people struggle with identity a lot, especially, someone, you've said your father's Iraqi, your mother's Lebanese, you're married to a Bahraini, you go to Iraq, you live in the UK. It's like, and then so it is very difficult. I'm guessing it's even more difficult for those now growing up in their teenage years. And sometimes I feel people don't know which identity they belong, they have, and then maybe at school they have one, and then in the mosque they have one, and at home they have one, and I'm sure that affects someone's mental health. So it's nice that you've put it that you don't have to belong to one.
Yeah, as in I think there is something there about acceptance and also about just owning the fact that you're different. Okay. So much of the time we want to fit in. It feels comfortable, doesn't it, when you fit into a box really, really neatly. But we just need to be okay with the fact that we're different sometimes. We need to be okay with the fact that one of my friends once said that her mum, whenever she'd ask her mum something, her mum would say, because we're weird. Okay? Because we're weird. And I thought that was a really interesting and unusual thing to say. But now I reflect on it and I think, goodness,
I'm weird.
I'm weird. Fantastic.
In a good way.
Yeah. And now that I've accepted that I'm weird and I no longer feel like I need to fit in, I can now just get on with, the business of being me and doing my best, rather than always having to fit in, because there's no way that any of us are ever going to fit in completely, because we are part of this, identity that's very different, and we've got lots and lots of, we've got lots of things going on at the same time. So we're never going to fit into a box. And I think we need to just appreciate that as one of our superpowers rather than being a hindrance.
The male-dominated world that we live in is big in Iraq. It's a male-dominated environment. Especially, you mentioned the cities of Najaf and Kadhimain, where this is maybe more visible. How do you, with your job, face this challenge? And is it maybe one of the toughest challenges?
Wow, big question as well. So, it's a really big question. So I'd say that it is true and it is correct that, in fact, females make up a really large percentage of the workforce in Iraq. But when you get to the more senior levels of management, in the same way as, in the UK, it is very male dominated. And there have been multiple instances, multiple times where I will be the only female in the room, or, the only female in particular situation. And then you have a few other layers to add on to it, such as you mentioned about the abaya. So in the UK, I don't wear an abaya, but in Iraq, I do always wear a head abaya. And then you've got particular also, social rules and unspoken rules about gender interactions in Iraq that are different to the UK. So it does, in the beginning, it definitely made life a bit more challenging, in that I was always super conscious about what I was wearing, how I looked, how I was talking. It made me feel really, really super conscious about all of that. But I have definitely adapted to it and grown to embrace it. So the abaya in the beginning, I was not too pleased about having to wear an abaya. It's a very
the head abaya,
the
just
head
so
abaya.
people, because a lot of people think it's just that one.
No, not
in
that.
Iraq, it's the
Iraq,
proper
like on your head,
what
on your head abaya, which is quite a tricky piece of clothing to wear.
I'm sure.
And I remember the first time I went to Iraq, every time I would get out of the car, I would accidentally step on my abaya. So it's not the easiest piece of clothing to wear. Then I thought, Amina, you need to make a decision right now, okay? Either I make a big deal about wearing that abaya, and I insist that, I wear hijab, I'm pleased with my hijab, I'm, satisfied with my hijab, and this is how I want to dress. And then the focus of others will be on my difference, and the focus of others will be on the fact that I look different to them. Or again, I accept that this is the uniform, this is the dress code. Let me dress the same way as everyone else. Let how I look mean nothing to anyone, so that they can focus on what I'm saying. Okay? And interestingly, one of the things that I realized was like, hey, I work in the NHS when I'm in the UK. And the NHS has its own rules and regulations,
Sure.
I can't go to work wearing a abaya if I wanted to in the NHS. I couldn't wear, you couldn't wear jewelry. You can't wear rings. You have to wear particular things. You can't wear anything that has slogans on it. So the NHS is an organization. It has its own philosophy, and it imposes its own uniform. And in the same way, other organizations, including those in Iraq, are allowed to have their philosophy, impose their uniform, and have their rules. And I'm happy to go with that. I really think that I want the focus to be on what I'm doing and saying, and anything that causes friction. If it's something that, if it's something that's not big, let it go. And the funny thing is, I actually now have got to the stage where I actually love wearing that abaya. I actually really, really love wearing it. I love how it makes me feel. It makes me feel, it makes me feel proud. It makes me feel really, connected to my faith. And it makes me feel powerful in a funny way. Yeah.
There's certain roles, I think, as well. Like, for example, I'm sure you'll have to speak to maybe certain widows. Maybe even certain children feel maybe more comfortable speaking to a female rather than a male. So with your role, I think it's very important that you're there for those widows, maybe because maybe they don't feel comfortable speaking to the males in Iraq. So that, even though it is a male-dominated environment in Iraq, I think more Iraqis, especially at organizations like Al-Ayn, which are very forward-thinking, realize the importance of women in these roles, rather than having men who maybe won't get the best job done with what they're doing. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Definitely, there are certainly some roles in the organization which women completely excel at and do really, really well in. So, for example, our therapists in Al-Ayn are majority female, and yes, most of the widowed mothers do feel much, much more comfortable opening up and speaking about their issues to another female, to someone who maybe has that understanding of their life experience, and to someone who they feel much more comfortable with. So there are some roles which, are very suited. But in general, as an organization, Al-Ayn is actually, I think, you know, a huge employer of women. I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's a large percentage of the workforce are females. And interestingly, a good number of the workforce are widowed mothers themselves,
Wow.
who were previously supported by Al-Ayn and
That's
are
amazing.
now working as
That is
Al-Ayn
amazing.
staff supporting others. So yeah, that's a real point of pride.
With Al-Ayn working at, I mean, I filmed a documentary for the Marja'iyya, and part of that was something about Al-Ayn. And I met some of the families, and then I done interviews with the director of Al-Ayn and heard some stories. And it, you know, it really affects you when you. And I've done maybe other documentaries also for where you see the poverty in Iraq, or you meet the orphans, or you meet the widows, and it really does affect you. And I'd say I maybe spent a few weeks doing that, and that's it. But it's always something that affects me.
It stays with you.
But when this is your job, I'm sure you've heard stories that have affected you. Before I ask you about any of those stories, how do you actually manage your own mental health?
Yeah.
Knowing that, you know, sometimes you meet stories that I'm sure you need time to recover, let alone the person who's gone through that.
Absolutely.
How do you actually manage your mental health and not, you know, become numb to these these stories?
You know, that's such a crucial point, isn't it? For various reasons. Like, it's very known that people who work in very caring, compassionate roles, and also people who are continuously exposed to other people's stories of trauma, okay, can be affected. And there are different levels that they can be affected at. You know, you've got burnout, you've got compassion fatigue, and even at the highest levels, you've got vicarious trauma, which is when someone is traumatized and will then experience the real symptoms of trauma as a result of having listened to these trauma stories again and again. And this is one of the points that I really focus on with our staff in Al-Ayn, both in Hikayati and the Luminous Stars, to really ensure that they are looking after their own mental health as well. So ensuring that you've got that downtime, ensuring that you've got that psychologically safe space to debrief with your colleagues when needed, ensuring that you have supervision and someone to talk to about those cases, and then being really aware of the early signs that you're starting to burn out or starting to suffer, and then getting help for yourself. So that's really important. You know, we wouldn't be human if we weren't affected by these stories, but also we're not going to be helpful if we're completely burnt out and have nothing more to offer. You know, it's a really, really stereotypic example, cliche used too much. But, you know, they always say that on the aeroplane, you put your oxygen mask on before you put the oxygen mask for anyone else. And it's true. If I'm tired and burnt out and upset and completely exhausted, I'm not going to be able to help anyone. So looking after myself as a carer or as someone in a compassionate role is looking after my patients, and so it has to be prioritized.
Are there any stories that have affected you, or can you share any of these stories?
No,
maybe.
Of course, there are stories that have affected me. You know, you mentioned it yourself, but you can't help but feel a certain amount of guilt or, you know, why me, when you realize just how privileged our lives are, you know, just how lucky our children are in comparison to the families who we meet every single day. I think that one of the stories that, always affects me most is the first time I went to Al-Ayn and I met they said that today you're going to do some interviews with widowed mothers. And I was sitting down, you know, preparing to interview the first widowed mother that was going to come in and see me. And for some reason, I was probably about 30 at the time, no, like 28 at the time. And I thought that like a 50-year-old woman was going to come in, you know, like a very old woman, a widow. That's the image you have in your mind. And the girl that walked in was 19 years old. You know, she was about a decade younger than me. And she had already been widowed. She already had children from her relationship. And as far as her family and her local society were concerned, her life was over at the age of 19, and she had her daughter with her. And her daughter was very nicely dressed. She was wearing a really, really fancy little dress. And so I asked her, just to break the ice, oh, that's such a lovely dress. Like, how comes you're so nicely dressed today? Like, are you going somewhere? And she said, no, the reason she's so nicely dressed is because I'm only allowed to see my daughter once a month. So the daughter was living with the, deceased father's family, and they would only let her see her daughter once a month, which was on the day that they would come to Al-Ayn to collect their aid. And so the daughter would always dress up really nicely to come and see her mum on that one day a month. And, I had to apologize. I was like, I just need to go to the toilet. And I went out and I burst into tears. Just the thought that this girl who was so much younger than me was going through so much. And I mean, since then, you hear more and more stories. They do affect you. But I always remind myself, and I always remind, the staff that I work with as well, that we are the helpers in this situation. This is their life, and it's very upsetting, and it's so unfortunate, that they have been through so much and they've had such hardship. But always remember that you are there to help, so your role is your role is one that's bringing a little bit of light into their life. And so focus on that, focus on what you can do, focus on what you can control, focus on what you can change. And there will be lots of things that we can't change. And that's where, the greater organization comes in, or dua, or just, keeping them in mind and holding them in our hearts and hoping that things do improve.
That light that you're providing these orphans or these widows, is that what drives you? Is that the passion that lets you continue doing what you're doing?
When you said that, for some reason, I felt really uncomfortable. So, yes, I may be, our work may be providing some light, but an honest truth, they are providing so much light to my life. I think just the blessings and the barakah and the privilege and the honor of serving far outweighs any benefit that I may be giving them. In terms of motivation, I don't know what it is. I think it's, you alluded to it yourself. Sometimes you just get bitten by this bug, and you just, there are some organizations that you work with or some work that you do that really gets you, hyped up, gets you excited, and it provides you with energy. And that's definitely what my work in Iraq has done for me. I think for a very long time, I felt a bit lost. I told you I was first in pediatrics, and then I moved to GP training, and I had this whole identity thing about Iraq and Lebanon and Bahrain and etc. And I think when I found this work, it gave me so much purpose. It gave me such a sense of purpose that I really feel very lucky to be doing my dream job.
Can you see your life without Al-Ayn?
No.
Can you imagine your life without Al-Ayn?
No. I don't think I can. That's such a funny thing to say, but because I told you, it takes up such a large part of my life, it takes up a large part of my husband's life, and it's been with us since our children were born. So it's very much a part of our family. I was looking at a furniture shop yesterday, and then I laughed because I realized I've actually decorated my house in blue and yellow.
The Al-Ayn colours.
Yeah. That was subconscious though.
Is your house like an Al-Ayn Sadaqa box with the glass, the blue
we
and
live
yellow?
Inside it. Yeah, we come in and out through that little flap every morning. Yeah.
How, other than talking of Sadaqa boxes now that I mentioned it, other than people using those Sadaqa boxes and the app, which is very easy. I love the app. It's the easiest, it's very simple, but it's just so easy because sometimes you face a trial maybe, or you face a test, or you going out to do something, and then you want to pay sadaqah. And maybe in Iraq it's much easier. I always say this to my family in Iraq. I say, you know, for you to pay sadaqah, it's really easy. You're driving, and then you'll see a beggar, and you'll give him sadaqah. And one of my favorite hadiths is as-sadaqah tadfa'u al-bala. Sadaqah removes any calamities that you might be facing. So you can do that more easy. And I thought, you know, in London it's very difficult. You know, we don't have any. You'd have to find a box, and then when the app started, it's so easy. Especially if you have Apple Pay on your phone, you can literally double click, and then you give sadaqah. And of course, with regards to Al-Ayn, as from my understanding from Ayatollah Sistani's rulings, as soon as you pay that sadaqah, it counts as maqboola, counts as a sadaqah that has been paid. Other than paying sadaqah, how can people maybe get involved with Al-Ayn?
Yes. Oh my goodness, there are so many different ways to get involved. So, you know, part of it, as you said, is in the fundraising arm. So be it sadaqah, be it your khums, be it, you know, setting up fundraising campaigns, getting involved. The other way, which is, you know, probably the biggest way, is sponsoring a child, sponsoring one of the children of Al-Ayn. That's a really beautiful thing to be able to do. Al-Ayn sponsorship is set at an amount which means that it covers the child's basic necessities. So it really does meet the sort of requirements to be a full kafala or sponsorship. And that's a really nice thing to be able to do. You know, to just feel like you are, we said we're so privileged, we're so lucky to be living such nice lives, and to think that you're able to provide for another child as well is a really wonderful thing. And then, of course, there's volunteering in all different roles within Al-Ayn and working with Al-Ayn. I mean, Al-Ayn's recruiting at the moment. They're always recruiting. They're always looking for, you know, talent within our communities, and being a part of the family and being able to have a career which serves you for your, you know, for your dunya and your akhirah at the same time is such a wonderful opportunity if people want to take it up. So there are lots of different ways to get involved. And Al-Ayn are always really happy to, you know, host people at the office, show them around, give them presentations, get them to know more about the work that they do. So definitely get involved.
Yeah. I think the sponsoring an orphans is the least someone can do in here living in the West with all the privileges that we have. I believe it's only around 50.
Yeah, I think it's £55 a month
for an orphan. And there's so many narrations from our Prophet about how much reward you get.
Absolutely.
The famous one being Rasulullah saying, you know, Ana wa kafir al-yatim kahataini bil jannah.
2 fingers.
Me and the sponsor of an orphan are like this in paradise. So, you know, and I could go on and do a whole lecture on sponsoring an orphan. So that's the least I think people can do. And I've always said I feel it's obviously I'm not giving a ruling, but it's close to being wajib, especially because...
Can we quote you on that?
No, don't please. But, you know, it's close to being wajib because of how many orphans there are in Iraq.
Yeah.
So
I'm
hoping...
so many are awaiting sponsorship. You know?
Wow.
Yeah, so many are awaiting sponsorship. So Al-Ayn currently has something like 76,000 orphan children on its books.
How many?
76,000.
Okay.
And no, I always call them orphan children because I always want to really focus on the fact that they are children. You know, they're children. And a number of them are privately sponsored, i.e. people are sponsoring, giving an amount every month, but a large number of them have not yet got to sponsor, and so they receive money which is collected from the sadaqah boxes or from the marja'iyah directly. And so being able to sponsor those children means that funds are freed up to sponsor even more and to expand the work even more. So sponsorship is a really important, I think, thing to do.
A story you could share with us about an orphan you met.
An orphan I've met, an orphan child that I've met.
This is gonna get everyone to sign up after they hear the story to sponsor an orphan.
Oh, okay. So this is a big one then.
Yeah.
I need to think about this one. Okay.
I'm sure there's a lot.
There are lots. This is one of the children that recently attended the Hikayati program just about 6 weeks ago. a young boy. He's about 12 years old. He was orphaned. He's one of the sons of the family. And he dropped out of school very, very early. And he decided to start washing dishes in a restaurant in Iraq. And earning pennies every day, washing dishes in a restaurant in Iraq. We heard his story and we thought, it's such a loss of an opportunity when a child leaves school. So we're really focusing with the Hikayati program on the children who've left school. So we invited him. He came along, attended our Hikayati programs, and then a few weeks later we got a letter from his mom, and she said that he had been washing the dishes in the restaurant for a few years, I think, and the owner of the restaurant would always swear at him, would always use really foul language with him, would really humiliate him at all times, And this boy had been living with that and accepting that and doing that. And then when he attended the Hikayati program and he attended our sessions on confidence and resilience building and self-esteem, he went and he handed in his resignation to the restaurant owner. And he said, I have discovered that I deserve to be treated better than this. And his mom had written that in her letter. And he actually left.
Wow.
And now he's one of the children that's interested in going back to school.
Amazing.
We've actually got out of 20 children that attended our last Hikayati program, 17 have expressed an interest in going back to school. And just to think that, think about it. For a 12-year-old boy to have dropped out of school and be washing dishes, imagine what the tangent for his life is. Imagine what his journey is. He's going to always be on a really low wage. He's probably going to get married, have many children who he may not be able to support very well. They're probably not going to go to school. You've then just got this generation upon generation of poverty, of trauma, of all this intergenerational difficulty that's being passed from one to the other, okay? Now just focus on the fact that this boy has realized that he deserves to be treated better. He's going to go back to school with that motivation. He's going to, inshallah, graduate from school, be able to get a better job. He's going to be able to make better life choices. When he has children, he's going to encourage them about education. And suddenly you've got a whole family tree whose lives have changed because you supported or sponsored that one orphan child in the beginning. And that's why it's so important, because poverty is a cycle and sponsorship breaks that cycle. Sponsorship breaks that cycle because it's not just financial sponsorship. As you know, with an Al-Ayn sponsorship, you get the money, but you'll get all the basic things like money and food and clothing and housing support if you need it. But you also get the mental health support. You also get access to the personal development Hikayati programs. You also get educational support if you need it. So it's a full package which aims to be life-changing.
How important is the mental health side of the sponsorship? Not just because now I see why you have a passion for child mental health. Which again, we started this conversation by saying mental health, there's a stigma around it. We need to create a change, which alhamdulillah you're doing, with regards to mental health being as a topic being discussed, being addressed. And the last few years that has been taking place generally. You see it more on social media, on the news. People are talking about it more. And then even within our communities. But then you have child mental health, which is something that, again, has a bigger stigma on. I'm not just talking about Iraq. I'm just here as well.
Of course.
With the rise of anxiety, depression, stuff like autism as well that affects children. So I see why you have an interest for this because of these stories, but how important is child mental health with regards to the sponsorship not being just financial?
Interestingly, I met with the CEO of Al-Ayn Iraq a few months ago, and he said that he is coming gradually to a real realization and a real sort of belief, qana'ah, that mental health is the most important service that Al-Ayn needs to provide. And the reason is because you can give someone food and clothing and accommodation and everything. If they are depressed or if they're anxious, they're not going to feel any of the joy or pleasure of any of that, right? It's like having gloomy specs on. The world looks like a dark place no matter what's happening, okay? So mental health is prime, it's fundamentally important, and it's, that's part of the reason why the recent campaigns have focused on these luminous star centers and trying to expand them so that we make sure that mental health support reaches the most remote, most, underserved areas in Iraq as well.
I'm sure, because of conflict, post-conflict, post-ISIS, there's more trauma in Iraq than here in the UK, obviously. But, child mental health affects, all children wherever they may be. How can a parent spot mental health difficulties in their children? Are there any signs that they should look out for?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing because if they look out for these signs and the child is at a young age, maybe there's more solutions rather than them growing up and then, la samahallah, God forbid, it leading to something maybe more serious.
Yeah. So 50% of mental health issues start before the age of 14. And so you're absolutely right.
Wow.
The early detection, early recognition is really, really, really important, okay? Because there's always more of a chance to do something about it if it's spotted earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So the signs to watch out for are, things like a change in a child's behavior. A child who was confident and chatty and loud who's suddenly become a bit more withdrawn. Or in fact, a child who was really shy who seems to have lost their inhibitions. Difficulties with sleep, difficulties with eating. Lots of children sometimes find it hard to express their emotions, and so their feelings can sometimes come out in physical symptoms like constant headaches, constant stomach aches, a drop in a child's school performance, or not wanting to go to school, or losing interest in the things that they usually found fun. If they used to go to football club or karate and they're suddenly not wanting to go anymore. Any of these are signs that something may be going on. And it's always really important to be curious and to try and work out why, and to have that sort of really open relationship with our children where we can talk to them and explore and ask them. And obviously also an open relationship with the school. School is where our children spend 8 hours a day, and so getting the opinion of the teachers as well about how they're doing in school is really important.
Are there sorry to interrupt, are there ways that parents can do to, or methods that can nurture a child's mental health? What can a parent do, and when do they start, because I always say, you mentioned something, a child finds it difficult to express their feelings. And sometimes, again, I'll use our communities as an example and maybe previous generations, because if you did express your feelings, you might be shut down. So therefore, you're always scared to express your feelings. And then if you keep them inside, this could obviously have an effect on your mental health. A child, I feel, needs to feel safe. Not just physically safe, of course, but emotionally safe to express their feelings without being judged, and also maybe express their feelings and still be loved. Because sometimes you can express your feelings and then you're going to be judged, and you feel, obviously no parent hates his children, but you feel you're being judged, and maybe you feel you might be less loved because of those feelings that you have, whether you're sad or angry or upset. So they need to feel, safe to express those 100%. Feelings. So how can we nurture a child's mental health?
You've said it all. You've said it all already, so much. I always say life is like a roller coaster.
Definitely.
You go up, you go down, you go upside down. If you think about it, roller coasters are actually super dangerous. You're on a metal chair, on a metal track, going at like 60 miles an hour. But actually you enjoy it. Why? Because you've got a seatbelt. Yeah? Life is like a roller coaster, and a parent is like a seatbelt. if your parent can hold you, if your parent can listen to you and stay loving you and caring for you and maintain what you said, that non-judgmental approach, even when you're saying things that might be difficult, you will survive that roller coaster of life. You will even enjoy it. It's all about having that nurturing, open, warm relationship with our children, which isn't always easy to do because it hasn't always been role modeled to us in previous generations, as you mentioned. You know, emotions for many of our parents who are, you know, who were immigrants, who came in times of real difficulty, emotions were a luxury they couldn't always afford to have. And so it's not always been role modeled to us, but this is our chance to change this. And I think part of it also is about what we call emotion coaching. So it's okay to express your emotions to your child as well and to demonstrate to them how to manage it. So I'll have times when I've come home from work, let's say, and I'm really, really stressed or I've had a bad day. And I'll say, you know, I feel a bit wound up. I feel like I've had a really, really heavy day, guys. Can you just give me 15 minutes? I just want to spend a bit of time by myself, you know, wash my face, just sit in quiet for a bit. I'm going to refill my battery. My battery is low now. I need to refill my battery.
Charge up.
So that I can come and give you some energy. Okay. And that teaches them that it's okay for them to do that when they need to. So yeah, part of it is about emotion coaching, having that really open relationship. And you know, they say you have to care about the small things, so they tell you about the big things. Like I've spent the whole morning talking about poppets. You know, I don't know, there's that poppet toy. There are these toys that children play with called poppets and they press.
Oh, yeah, okay, I know them. Yeah, the ones that you,
I have zero interest in poppets, but my daughter is currently obsessed with poppets. So when she talks about them, I need to show some interest.
Genuine interest.
Genuine interest. Yeah, or at least appear to be genuine interest. Because if I care about the little things she talks about, then she will tell me about the big things she, that you know are worrying her too. So having that relationship is key. Alhamdulillah, it really seems that so much of our generation now, like the new young parents in our community, are really aware of this, and I'm excited to see the outcome in the next generation.
I'm sure during pandemic, generally mental health was on a, you know, bad mental health was on a right, and I'm sure more in children as well, because you know they're used to, you know, they need that space to run around and be free and be a child.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, this was difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents weren't coping. A lot of children weren't coping. And even Iraq, when I think there was a period when they went into lockdown as well, it must have been difficult. How can one overcome that challenge if, God forbid, we're faced with a situation where...
Again, yeah. I mean, you're right that the pandemic has had a huge impact. So in a large national mental health survey, they compared mental health in 2017 to mental health in 2021. And before, 1 in 10 children had mental health difficulties, and now it's 1 in 6 children have mental health difficulties. So it's definitely had a large impact. And you're right, we were confined, we didn't have our usual social connections, we were under a lot of pressure, there was a lot of anxiety about death and illness, and we lost our coping mechanisms. You know, like your coping mechanism might be going out with your friends or seeing your family or going to the park or going on holiday, and all of those things were taken away. So it's no surprise that there has been an impact. And again, I would just say that it goes back to, you know, talking about your feelings and remembering that you're on a roller coaster. It's time to be a seatbelt now. It's time to talk about these things to ensure that, you know, I don't pass on those anxieties to my child, that I explain things to them in an age-appropriate way, and that I look out for the early signs that help might be needed and I access them, but also that as a parent, I access help for myself. You know, I said that it's so important for therapists and people in caring roles to have support. Similarly for parents, you know, parenting is a tough job, and you may have been, let's say, very, very anxious about the pandemic yourself, and at the same time, you're trying to reassure a child and bring them through it safely. So you need that outlet to talk about your own feelings as well. And that's where having other adults, be it, trusted friends and family, or be it professional help, is a really good idea.
Well, Amina, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure doing this podcast.
I've really enjoyed it.
I know you've also been nominated as GP of the Year. So well done on that. And inshallah, we wish you all the best in all the projects you're taking on. I'd like to end by asking you how you balance your life with the many jobs that you have, and of course your two beautiful children. Because I think that's what is difficult maybe for a lot of youth in our community, a lot of couples, maybe because of financial issues, and even before, where both parents have to work and they have children, and maybe sometimes do more than one job like yourself. So how do you balance your life? How do you make sure what's the word now? I've done the opposite where I've forgotten the English word and I know the Arabic. ما تقصرين. How do you
give
make sure you're not, there's no shortcomings in anything that you're doing?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think everyone's struggling. Everyone's got their, all the balls that they're juggling, and everyone has to find their way. And I think that, different things work for different families, and everyone needs to do what's right for them. And for some people that is, taking time to really focus on their children and taking time out of work. For others, like for me, I know that working gives me energy, and working makes me personally a better mother. And so it's something that I've continued to want to do. But it is tough, especially as, women. I think you're expected to work as if you have no family, and be a mother and a wife as if you have no work. And there is a lot of expectation. And guess what? I'm not going to say, that it's perfect. Like, there are loads of balls that are being juggled at the same time. And at some points, some of the balls drop. But, life is messy. Life is imperfect. And we're all just trying our best. And I think, that's how it is. And I would say that my one piece of advice is to it goes back. So we've gone full circle now. So to go back to the beginning, which is just remember to look after yourself. Like if you're doing so much, then it's so important to fill your own cup regularly. And that's definitely something that I learned in the pandemic was really important to me. So now more than ever, I really, really, prioritize time to myself, time doing the things that I care about. And ensuring, that I have the energy and the filled cup so that I'm able to fill other people's cups when needed.
Inshallah, it's always filled up.
Thank you.
Dr. Amina, if you want to follow Dr. Amina on social media, I believe your Instagram is open. So people can maybe see some of do you share your journey maybe in Iraq or your work?
Yeah, I love sharing my Iraq journey.
So people can follow her, inshallah, on her Instagram. We'd like to thank you for your time, and inshallah we'll see you soon.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.